I've got a decent background, but it's always good to have a backup in case there's a messianic cessation of happening on Zoom.
Ooh, that's true. Messianic cessation.
No, tell him the story from last time, Pils.
Oh yeah, I did. I fucked up. I fucked up big time.
Yeah, but you take all the responsibility. That's also your problem. You should learn to delegate.
Well, Eric knows how infrequently I forget to record. Like that was the first time, and it was the time that he wasn't here.
Yeah, that's surprising. You're usually on your shit, man. What's going on?
It's because Diego makes me nervous. He's got so many followers.
No, you're gonna have so much shit in my background between an axe and like a hype and Evangelion. Like I have a confusing background.
Look at this.
Oh yeah, look
background.
at that.
Yeah, yours is very like nihilistic. It's kind of like makes me feel like I'm laying in the sofa of my psychoanalyst, looking at the ceiling, which is the most scary thing you can look at.
It's the partial object. It's just the blank screen.
Yeah.
All right. With that. Don't know if we're going to use that. But anyway, wait, what number are we on? 95. Welcome, listener. You are on Pill Pod, number 95. We have lost a member to Europe. He went where? I don't know where he is right now. Germany. So
Germany,
shout outs to Victor. But we have, so he's got some big feet filling his shoes here. And it's again, Mr. Diego Ruzzarin, he makes this a true North American podcast. Hailing from Mexico.
I'm so proud to be here. I'm a big fan of the podcast, of the Pill Pod, to be honest with you guys. And I also have to add that even if Victor is currently in Germany, depending on what time you're listening to this podcast, maybe after World War III is the larger republic of North China, or the potential longer republic of new NATO or something like that. We'll see.
Depending on when you're listening to this.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything's up in the air over there.
Or Somaliland too, or something like that. We don't know.
Yeah, coming to you from before the apocalypse. It's the Pill Pod.
Yeah, you guys just dig this out of the dust, and suddenly it's a Pill Pod about Spinoza. I'm sorry to disappoint. There's nothing here to rebuild civilization.
Yeah, so I mean, we have variously plans, ideas. Diego and I got in an argument on a Twitter live space about materialism. We might pick that up. Mm-hmm. Diego and Eric are both really into Walter Benjamin. We might pick that up. But at least the general thread that is not yet woven into any sort of tapestry is the episode title, which I'm sure you've seen, God and Communism. Mm-hmm. And we don't know where it's going to go. It's going to be off the cuff.
Yep.
Heyo.
How do you guys want to set this up? What's the intro here?
I guess I picked the topic based on those different arguments. We weren't arguing with each other so much as arguing with
other people,
other disembodied voices.
Yeah, exactly.
But it was we're kind of arguing about dualism and materialism versus ideology, and you were kind of lumping religion into ideology. Mm-hmm. We don't want to be too heavy-handed, I don't think, because
with the labeling,
God, with the Lord, heavy-handed is not
which Lord?
So
the hand of the market.
Yeah,
the invisible
Lord?
hand, yeah. Lord of Lords, King of Kings,
the invisible reach around,
God of Gods. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I guess if you've seen my content lately, it's been bending towards theology of capitalism, mm-hmm. which was my latest video. And then Edward Bernays. So Freud's nephew, maybe we'll start with this. Okay. Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, was hired by Alan Dulles when he was the director of the CIA in the 50s to pretty much just wage psychological warfare on the people of Guatemala and Americans. And he set up this whole advertising campaign, distributing leaflets and writing in the New York Times, I believe, and Time magazine. And he set up this giant psychological war called God or Communism. And the idea was Arbenz is a communist, which he wasn't, but Arbenz is a communist because he's trying to nationalize the United Fruit Company land in Guatemala. And you have to make a choice as the hearer of this propaganda. You have to make a choice. Are you going to take the side of God and Christianity, or are you going to take the side of the godless communists? And apparently Arbenz is a Soviet agent, which he was not. But this was the story they told, and it was successful in being able to produce support, right? Popular support in both America and in Guatemala for coupping Arbenz and sending him into exile. So anyway, that's the backstory why I thought, hey, God versus communism, to what extent are these reconciled or reconcilable? And maybe we can just kick it off from there.
Yeah, you forgot to mention God, Christianity, and capitalism. They sometimes go hand in hand.
They tend to go hand in hand.
I think so. But Bernays, didn't he also do something with Dole Fruit too? He's the guy who worked with the United Fruit Company, and the Banana Republic thing came out of Bernays's kind of shock treatment of.
And despite this Christianity versus communism thing, he was Jewish. So.
Yeah, and he also worked with this modern notion of the American breakfast as well, which when I was working with the food industry, I got in touch with some of his work and how he originally changed, that basically Americans are so heavy on cereal in the morning because of a campaign they did with Kellogg's, introducing this notion that cornflakes was a fundamental part of breakfast, which caused a mass disaster of diabetes, like giving a point to our friend Marx again. And why I'm saying by saying this, let's say by the Orthodox Marxist tradition, the dialectical materialism is very simplistically saying is the notion that material basis or the material conditions of the world creates or produces idealistic superstructures, or this notion of the superstructures. And my reading in the tweet space that got controversial pills is that my current reading of Spinoza applied to dialectical materialism is that there's no real dialectical retroactive feed cycles between the superstructural ideas and the material basis. And my notion, being very monistic about this reading, is that everything that we understand as subjectivity, ideology, theology, it's symptomatic. It's not dialectic. It's symptomatic. What we can do is use critical theory tools to, in a way, dig through the mud and see the relationship between the symptoms and the causes. But the causes are in a more Spinoza way within a system, within the substance that is just showing itself in various forms and modes. But in the end, everything that is idealistic, everything that is in the ideal world, it's symptomatic to the material world. But there's no retroactive symptom. There's no way for the symptom to retroactively change the material conditions.
So it sounds like, to me, what you're saying then is that monism doesn't encompass both materialism and idealism. That idealism is almost like a surface effect.
Yep.
It's almost like I don't know if I want to bring up this word, epiphenomenon. It's a surface effect, and there's a one-way causal relationship.
Yep, something like that.
Okay, I see that. I tend to like to try and expand monism, if I'm thinking that way, to include ideas and ideology, but maybe that's not the right way I should be approaching it.
I don't know, Pills. This was the starting point, no? This was the context in which we started this conversation. Yeah, and I would love to hear your guys' point of view about this, because I'm truly trapped in this idea right now. It's not a straw man that I'm painting from myself. This is truly where I stand, in the sense that, I don't know if Eric, if you knew, but my wife is a Lacanian psychoanalyst, and she is practicing. Like, she has over 30 patients. So I've read Lacan all my life. I've read Freud all my life. I started in philosophy because of my son's disease, into capacism, into this notion of the excluded others that are not able to produce. And then I got into the Marxist tradition because of that. And now, after all this reading, I got into this notion that even if I understand the value of psychoanalysis and other methodological tools for us to understand the idealistic world, in the end, and also in action, I see that more and more idealism is nothing more than a symptom from the material conditions.
I did listen to the last episode you were on, so this sounds very familiar to me. And very much sympathize with that approach. And it seems like the angle that I kind of take, if you're familiar with what I look at sometimes, is like biosemiotics and some new research, yes. when they talk about gut health and things like that, right? There's a materialistic basis even there. We're deepening our understanding of how our attitudes and how our moods and our emotions and our ideas are affected by our gut health and what we eat, and our bodily constitution really affects our ways of thinking as well. And how can you have a revolution on empty stomachs and Kellogg's cornflakes? You just can't do it.
I was just having this conversation last week. Actually, last week so you guys see I'm also in practice and not only in theory. I'm not fake to my own beliefs. I organized last week a congress in Mexico City that we call Confluencia. It's confluence. And I brought some friends that are philosophers, most of them PhDs from Spain and Argentina, to think about an Iberophonic identity. So what does it mean to speak Spanish and Portuguese, since the two languages are the only two languages in the world that share a 99% compatibility and are based on the verbs ser y estar, which means to do and to be, which are very materialistic. And we were even discussing how German and English are very idealistic languages because the subject is always implied, and he's implied in a metaphysical sense. And Spanish and Portuguese, the subject only is in action. The subject only is when he's doing. And we were having these conversations in Spanish about the materialistic tradition and what we can do with the materialistic tradition in Spanish that maybe was not able to be done in other cultures, in other moments in the world, and in other languages for sure.
So are you saying that English and German lends itself towards a theological metaphysics?
Yes.
Or an onto theology?
The very material condition of the sounds and the structure of the language itself tends to idealism.
How does French fit in with these, between the two?
It's also very romantic, but I think the metaphysical subject in French structure is different. I mean, I'm not that fluent in French, even if I can read it and I can kind of speak it. It tends to more the romantic root, to the Roman root. But specifically, Spanish and Portuguese, the verb is always super active. Like the subject is acting all the time. He's doing in the world. He's not implied as a metaphysical subject.
Okay, so if we're asking a question, kind of like we opened up with, what is God? What is God for? There's many. This is maybe it's too stupid to try to deal with this in an hour. But the argument that you made, I noticed, was only about causality. It wasn't about the personality of God. It wasn't about whether God loves us, cares for us, or the utility of religion for like social cohesion or anything like that. The only thing you care about, it seems like, is causality.
Yeah, cause of itself.
And not dialectical causality.
No, like pure difference, cause of itself causality.
So what if someone's like offended because they believe in God and it's a part of their identity and part of their religious community?
I don't really care.
You don't care? Okay.
I don't care about offended people.
Yeah.
they don't bring much to the discussion, to be honest.
Well, I don't think dialecticism,
from a moral point of view. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I didn't want to interrupt you. I was just going to add, I don't think dialecticism has to imply dualism, does it?
Okay, good. Can we start from there? What's a monistic dialectics? How do you differentiate one thing from the other in a monist point of view, having dialectic as a relative difference?
When I listen to the sort of arguments that the Žižekians, for example, present against Spinoza and Spinozist influenced posthumanism, they will say, we got to start with Descartes. And Descartes famously introduces this dualism, right? You have substance dualism. You have mind on the one side, matter on the other side, or substance. And they then travel forward in time to Hegel, who maybe I'm gonna botch this because I haven't looked it over lately. But the questioning of the subject, the critique of the subject, was completed during German idealism for them. And now this new assault that is coming from posthumanism, developing a monistic standpoint, is just repeating this kind of gesture that has already been completed. That's like a very simplified version of what they sometimes say. And so I kind of read that as dialecticism doesn't imply dualism, because you're not starting with this dualistic ontology. You're starting with the thesis antithesis, but you don't want to say antithesis because the antithesis comes from within the thesis. It's not something external to the thesis. That's basically what I mean. The thesis develops into the antithesis through the second stage, the negative dialectic stage. That's how I put it. That's really confusing, but it seems to say that it's not dualistic in the Cartesian sense, anyway.
Are you going to comment something, Pils, or can I?
No, please respond.
Please. So there's a text that I looked up for this from a guy named Wilfred Cantwell Smith. I don't know if you guys heard about him before. He has a book called The Meaning and the End of Religion. And I just want to read something very, very quick. So first, like the notion of the book is that religion is an Eurocentric term. And normally what you have to do is that you have to secularize the meaning of religion in order to apply the category of religion to somebody that is religious. Okay. And this is what for me causes a lot of this confusion, because for people that are true religious, they're not religious. For them, religion is ontology. I don't know if this is explaining it clear enough, in the sense that, for a Buddhist, Buddhism is not a religion, it's a worldview. You need the secularized reading of the word religion in order to apply religion as a category to religion itself. So religion only makes sense from a secularized point of view from religion. You see, like the word religion already implies that religion is ideology. Mm-hmm. And going back to Marx with this, because if we're orthodoxies with the reading, is that the material bases create the ideal superstructures, but ideal superstructures exist not only to mask the material basis, but to perpetuate them, in order to maintain the stability of the material basis that produces the idealistic superstructures. So in that sense, what is interesting for me, and I would love to have Eric's take on this, because this will take us closer to Benjamin, okay, is the sense of what is the function of religion. Like we can already pretty much admit that religion is symptomatic. Like religion doesn't create the world creates religion. No, and this is dialectical materialism. Ideas don't create the world creates ideas. So in that sense, even religion is a consequence of past material conditions that produce these worldviews. And what is important for people listening to this discussion is that when you already use the word religion to describe religious practice and religious belief, you're making a a movement of hands. And by switching a religious point of view that is ontological, that is a notion of the world, is a worldview, and you're treating it as a subcategory of belief. So it's already ideological. So in that sense, for me, it's already ideology. So for me, the real question is not what comes before. We already have established that material conditions come before. What I'm interested in is arguing whether or not religions dialectically change the world or not. And this, of course, will take us into the field of free will, because in the end, how much of our consciousness, of our subjectivity interpretation of free will is able to alter back material conditions?
You've almost you've paraphrased Marx very closely there, actually.
What did I say?
Well, right near the beginning, you said the world creates religion. You've paraphrased Marx very closely here. The human being makes religion. Religion does not make the human being. Exactly. Religion is the self-consciousness and self-esteem of the human.
I'm less anthropocentric than Marx. I think Marx was a crypto-humanist. And that's probably the problem. I mean, as the same way people criticize Hegel for not being Hegelian enough, we can maybe even say that Marx was not Marxist enough, in the sense that I think Marx still carries an anthropocentric bias that is no longer necessary. That's why I think I paraphrase it, because I remember the sentence, but I don't completely agree with it. I don't think. What was Marx's way? Humans don't create religion?
The human, this is from 1844. So he's still in his kind of disalienation phase. But yeah, you're right. Yeah. So that is
Marxist humanism. He wasn't really a crypto-humanist either. He was pretty much
explicitly humanist at this point.
You're right.
Yeah, but he was really young. He was 28 when he wrote that.
1844. Yeah, the human being makes religion. Religion does not make the human being. Religion is the self-consciousness and self-esteem of the human who has either not yet won through to himself or has already lost himself again. So human-centric. Yeah, right. Anthropocentric here.
And he also calls it, I mean, people use this to criticize Marx, but he also says, it's the opiate of the people. Which I think is, it's misunderstood because we think opiate means, it's something bad, but it's like opiate is a painkiller. Because it's the heart of the heartless world. So he's not explicitly anti-theist. I think he thinks that religion is important, but also it serves this ideological function at the same time to be the salve so that you don't need to change your material conditions.
Yeah, it has a kind of anesthetizing effect because it's an expression of suffering, but it creates an inverted world, one that reflects the material world, but in inverted form. Just as Hegel is sort of needing to be turned on his head because he gives us an inverted idealistic dialectic, whereas Marx is going to give us a materialistic dialectic, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So here's where it's getting interesting to me, because taking Marxism seriously, and if you try to be a serious dialectical materialist, you either have to become theological in the sense that Marxism becomes messianic, since, there's a logic to material conditions and there's an endpoint resolution to these antagonisms that will eventually take us to the culmination of history. So there's a poetic messianism implied in the very orthodox reading of Marx. And on the other hand, you need to be completely away from self-determinism. You need to be completely a hard determinist. Because if in reading Spinoza again, okay, so the notion of liberty from freedom from Spinoza is freedom is the subjective ignorances of the causes that condition us. So we're only free as much as we don't understand the previous causes that conditions our notions of freedom, right? Mm-hmm. So we're only free in as much as we don't understand the relationships of cause that provoke our notion of freedom. But if you apply that notion of freedom to Marxism, then the only way to be a truly a dialectic materialist is to be hard determinist. So there's no room for the second part of the dialectic to come down from superstructures to material basis.
Mm-hmm. That's the kind of Spinozist argument, because we as we grow in knowledge, we learn what causes things, what determines things, and so our growth in knowledge brings determinism into play, but through that there's a paradoxical freedom that comes around with knowing determinism. Is that right? Maybe I've butchered that a little bit.
Well, Spinoza, the best explanation I've heard about the definition of freedom from Spinoza is that you're standing in front of two doors, A and B, and you choose to open door B. Okay, and you open door B and you feel happy that you went through door B. But the issue is that door A was always locked and you never tried. So you have this notion of freedom based on your bodily experience of the world, and you tell yourself the story of freedom because you don't understand the limitations of the material world. In the same way that we think there's a certain degree of freedom from our actions, but we don't understand all the microbiome decision-making that is taking place prior to subjectivity that condition our notion of freedom.
Yeah, I think I like that. That's complexity theory as well today, right? We just sort of retroactively project free choice onto our decisions. After the fact. Yeah. After the fact, I was free to choose door B in the first. I could have chosen A.
So are you saying you're making a determinist case more or less here?
I know.
Hard determinist?
Fuck! Don't put me there. I don't know, man.
Okay, because when we're dealing with like Spinoza's substance, it's not clear that we're talking about the way we conceive materialism. That's why it's called Spinoza's God. It's not necessarily material.
Yeah.
But I guess the ignorance of not knowing what we had chosen I don't necessarily think that it leads to determinism necessarily, because you wouldn't know either way.
So you think there's freedom in mistakes?
I believe it. I would believe that there's accidents in a sort of Spinozan universe that could be.
I agree.
They could be called freedom.
I agree.
It's not the freedom of like an individual human subject. I think all of us are past that in this conversation.
Yeah.
But the accidents.
we're not liberals. Come on, man. Don't insult me like that.
The liberal subject.
Yeah. If you call me liberal,
what I would say is like nature itself can make what we'd call accidents.
Yeah.
Or causeless effects.
That's why
unclear effects.
That's why I would not commit to this notion of hard determinism, because I think there's still some potentiality. This difference between freedom from and freedom to. There's still room for newness, but newness is not experienced, newness is not provoked by the ideal subject that is acting upon the material world. But newness is creative retroactively, as our subjectivity signifies what happened after it has already taken place. And maybe by accident or by lack of information, we influence the outcome of a given point in time, and we provoke newness. But it doesn't necessarily correspond to what we wanted to do, to what we understood, and to the current limitations of the material world. It's signifying after it has already happened.
Right. The ideological superstructure, as a kind of surface effect, attempts to grasp the material causes, but it doesn't cause those causes. Those causes cause it, but that's what we grasp them through in a certain sense.
Exactly my point, Eric. I think you were able to explain my position better than myself. I like this notion that yes, idealism is how we explain the world. But you see, it's like secularizing the notion of religion to call religion something else that is not ontology.
This is a point we kind of moved past very quick, but I think it's actually very important, and it's really Nietzsche's big contribution to philosophy. Well, values. As soon as something is a value, which means it's relative and not necessary, and God didn't invent it, then you don't believe it anymore. So as soon as religion is something that you can choose off the shelf, if you go into the marketplace of religions and say, I think I'm leaning towards Taoism. As soon as you get to choose, now you are no longer a religious person. Now you are basically a consumer of an idea structure.
The marketplace of ideas.
Exactly. Yeah. You see, check this out. I'm just going to read a part of it. Even more strikingly, Smith notes that ancient Egyptians, Iranian, Aztecs, Chinese, Japanese, Indian, Indonesian, Greeks, and Hebrews did not possess indigenous words for religion.
Yeah.
You see, religion is a word that was brought from Europe to these other countries, and Europe called them religious.
Yeah.
And what we have to understand, historically, most of these cultures, the religious word was the same as law. It was a synonym. If it was in the scriptures, it was law. It was a worldview. It was not religion as we understand it today.
Yeah, there's no sacred texts in ancient Greece. No, not Hesiod, not Homer. They're not sacred texts. They're just stories embodied in whoever wrote them. Hesiod writes a poem, the Theogany. It's not. There's no dogma. There's no central set of beliefs that you have to prescribe to. It's actually a little bit like medieval Christianity was before the High Middle Ages, when it all got kind of centralized and assimilated into a set of beliefs. Then you get a dogma, and if you don't stick to that dogma, you're persecuted.
So to return to this Spinoza God, I'm sure you know the Deleuze reading of Spinoza, right?
Yeah, I have the book. I have the book right here.
Yeah. So if we have, that you're making the hard determinist case a little bit, and his way out of that, I think, would be to say that what you actually observe, I think what you're calling material or the settled world, something like that, what you actually observe is not how things had to be, because reality is both virtual and actual, differentiating. So just because something is a certain way, it didn't have to be that way. And that's why this notion of accident and difference and repetition exists. Why difference is still in what we see and observe as actual. So that would be a way to reintroduce the possibility of accident and contingency. And like Eric was talking about, him and I agree on this point in terms of complexity theory. Complexity leads to complexity.
Mm-hmm. And the difference that makes a difference. Gregory Bateson.
Yeah, cybernetic virtual.
Yeah, I think that's why I really love your latest readings of capitalism in this more machine-like, But also there's a theological aspect to the machine-like behavior. But in the same sense that we are ourselves unable to judge our worldview as ideological. I think it's the same criticism that Freud did to the critics of psychoanalysis, that people tend to use and understand psychoanalysis on other people, but not on themselves. Is as if we are resilient to judge our worldviews as ideological as well. But in the Marxist tradition, like in the Marxist reading, in the sense that your worldview is a product of your material conditions. And if we're strict to that, what we can say, even to Marxism, is that the relationship between Marxism and theology, it's also dependent on the material conditions that allow us to make that interpretation in the first place. Because otherwise it will imply us being in a what is the name of this punto, like at this point outside, like as if we were standing outside of ideology, judging ideology from space,
Archimedean.
Archimedean.
Exactly. Is as if we're taking an Archimedean point to be the unideological readers of ideology, which is like, that's impossible. I mean, if you're serious about Marxism, your points of view are also ideological. But I think ideology, because of Zizek maybe, was given this very negative connotation. But in the end, for me, the problem, and this is the central point of the conversation I wanted to have with you guys, is that religion, before the European invasion, was also ideology. And worldview, ontology, is ideological in the sense that material condition produces ideological points of view from the world.
Yeah, now we're going into semiotics, which is
your field, Derek.
Somewhere we're both very comfortable, actually. Yeah. But yeah, the fact that you can believe something while knowing that it is part of the sign system that is I don't really like using the word determined myself, but it does define the channels of possibility within your specific sign system. And I think this is interesting in terms of when you're speaking of religion, because one of the stories that I don't know if it's true or not, but I like repeating it, is that this whole Buddhism is a way of life thing, as opposed to a religion, was a colonial interaction when the Christians are, getting all over the world, and the Buddhists there say, this isn't a religion, don't worry. Like, this is a way of life thing. You don't need to come kill us. We're not pagan priests, just a way of life thing, which is like what you're saying, this interaction between the Christian monolith, the monolithic religion that says everything else is a demonic perversion of Christianity if it's not Christianity.
Paganism.
Which creates it's a dialectic inversion of all others are in this Manichaean framework, which isn't an invention of Christianity, of course.
Yeah, you're religious. We're right.
Yes. You have the wrong one.
Yeah.
We do have that problem sometimes, though, and this was like a big vent on like TheoryTube when that TheoryTuber was explaining Kant, and I think it was Hans-Georg Müller. He did a review of his explanation of Kant, and he said this guy's completely confused transcendent with transcendental. Transcendent is that place where God lives, God, freedom and immortality of the soul. That's transcendent. Transcendentalism is a weird sort of in between, right? It's points more towards subjectivity and the categories and logic, as opposed to the transcendent, which is what is just by definition beyond what we can experience. We can't experience the transcendent. I don't know how you get there. It's super sensible. It's only in thought. It's only in rationality. At least I'm just sort of spouting out some Kantian stuff there. But it's reasonable because Zizek does hold to this, right? He's a transcendentalist in a certain way. He just has also his theory of ontological incompleteness that goes along with it. So when you encounter a contradiction, that's because the structure of reality has contradiction written into it.
I would love to bring if we can at some point, a friend of mine from Spain called Ernesto Castro. He's fluent in English as well, PhD. The guy teaches aesthetics in the University of Salamanca, not Salamanca, of Madrid, I think he's in right now. And like his notion of aesthetics, you guys will simply adore. Like he's super into Maurice Merleau-Ponty. Like his notion of aesthetics is very much in line of what we understand as aesthetics, I think. And the guy, we recorded a podcast last week, and he was explaining to me the 7 definitions of freedom based on the 7 definitions of love from the Platonic dialogues. It was incredible. Like his work is fucking fantastic. The guy's brilliant. But I would love to get into this notion and this conversation, because in the end, what I think the big conundrum is in this conversation, and since like I think most of my friends in the academic world are either Marxist or materialist, which is kind of hard, because now, like, if you're leftist and you're not Marxist, I don't trust you. If you're leftist and you're Marxist but you're not materialist, I don't trust you at all. You know, it's like it's kind of weird, because it tends to push you to this notion that the enemy is idealism. And it's messed up, because when you get to materialism, my problem is determining the role of freedom in materialism. You know, is exactly what is the right level of freedom? How do we understand freedom from a monist, materialist point of view that is non-dialectical? Because the whole notion of dialectics implies concepts that are or entities that are cause of themselves. Because to be dialectical beyond the idealistic part of dialectics, if you want to be dialectical materialist, without the Spinoza point of view that there's no entities that are cause of themselves beyond the one substance, how is dialectics taking place if everything is intertwined? What do you mean dialectical? In the sense that how is one thing disconnected from the rest that it can be the cause of something else?
So you're making an argument against dialectics?
Again, yes.
Have you heard of something called negative theology?
No, is the Adorno one?
No, that's negative dialectics. But negative theology actually goes back to like the early church fathers in like the 3rd century. But negative theology is a theology without the dialectics, because the only thing you cannot say anything true about God. You cannot make any proposition about God, because God is eternal, transcendent. So the only thing you can say about God are negative statements.
God is not.
Say God is not limited. God is not finite. Yeah. So it really reduces the dependency of religion and like theology on language. It just says the only true things you can say about God are negative statements, which
that's interesting.
I mean, in terms of theology that I like to read, it's the one that I'm partial to, because it's the only one that can be right. You know,
it's sort of like what
or
Augustine
not wrong.
is.
Oh yeah, or not wrong at least. Yeah, at least you're not making false statement. You're just saying what is not possible.
Negative epistemology. I'm not wrong. I think that's sort of what Augustine is thinking about a little bit. Like God, if God fills everything, then where's freedom? He sort of inhales a little bit, like sucks his belly in, and leaves a little bit of room there, or something like that kind of a metaphor for negative theology. He just evacuates a little bit.
So to say anything positive about God, then that would be to create difference, but you can't create difference in God, because there is no difference in God.
God is everything.
He's infinite.
Yeah. So can we talk about the instrumental use of religion in Marxism, and maybe go there, because there's 2 readings. We can have the reading, the one you said at the beginning, saying that religion was also almost antagonical to communism, because of course, in a sense, some branches of Marxism, Leninism were atheist. But also there's Walter Benjamin, there's other readers of socialist Christians that have found a way to to make the two schools of thought copulate and coexist, which I find very hard to believe. Like, I find it hard to believe for an idealistic point of view to coexist with a materialist transition. Either you stand from a point of view and you say, okay, dialectical materialism is messianic. So since dialectical materialism is messianic, I can choose whatever narrative or whatever literature I want to overcoat and paint over dialectic materialism to help me tell the story in a way that people will empathize with. You know, it's like Eric was saying, I just choose a coating of paint to put over dialectical materialism because there's a bunch of cogs and mechanisms going under that we don't fully understand, but responds to an internal system of logic, which is dialectical materialism. And we paint over it Judaism, Christianism, whatever story you want to tell. But it's a very laid back position because you're just waiting for story to unfold.
Yeah,
wait. Where were we going with that?
comparing this, like being a Marxist and having some theological background, and being a Marxist and being fully atheist, but also being a determinist, because you have to commit to this idea of dialectical materialism.
Well, there's a few. I mean, just to like give the options on the shelf here. There's like socialist Jesus is one version of this. Like Jesus is a socialist revolutionary before the Advent, or like religion is a useful tool for getting buy-in, which is a rather, I guess, kind of cynical view that we can use religion to organize, but we don't really believe it, you know? And then there's the psychoanalytic approach, like we need to believe in some higher power to be able to like believe in ourselves. So it's again, a cynical humanist argument. I'm kind of partial to the cynical humanist argument, actually. Yeah. I don't believe we're really free, but we kind of need to believe we're free to get things done.
Yeah.
But you're making an argument about, strictly speaking, metaphysics.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. What do you think, Eric?
I mean, there's so many ways I want to go with it. In a way, I like the negative theology approach because I do want to make room for spiritualism in Marxism. I think it is just practical to say, you know, okay, there is Christian socialism. It is a valid position. Just really practically speaking, saying there's a huge swath of people out there. Like in an earlier episode when Matt was speaking with Aaron, I think his name was, from the ICS, from the Institute for Christian Socialism, that many people are driven away from their faith because it's been, you know, colonized by republicanism and really like right-wing views. So I think just practically speaking, I don't know, I'll try to get back to theory, but I mean, just practically speaking, we need that. We need to be able to say, if you have some kind of faith, whatever it is, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, there's room for you in a socialist movement. But how we take that then back to Marx's work and say, okay, well, here's where, you know, like it's the opium of the people, isn't to say it's a bad thing. We've already kind of established that, right? It's an expression of suffering. And that's the key word. It's expressive. So it is ideological. And in that sense, it has a kind of anesthetizing effect. Suffering is at the heart of religion. And our suffering makes us into believers, and believing helps us deal with that suffering. Just as, you know, psychoanalysis depth psychology tries to look inwards and see that those sources of suffering.
Yeah, I'm going to quote probably one of my favorite philosophers and thinkers of all time and say, do ideas matter?
That's the problem, right? If ideas are simply caused by material circumstances, not simply, actually very complexly caused by material circumstances, then what good is it? But it depends on how you make you feel, right? It's an effective kind of. We have to be in the realm of affect. What Peirce would call firstness, right? Affect influences us first of all. And it's getting to reality, because reality is that thing, right? Ideas don't matter to reality, because he defines it as reality is exactly what it doesn't matter what you or I or any number of people think about it. Reality is reality itself. But there is still an effective approach. There's still it makes us feel things.
Yeah. So my question is specifically in that end of the loop. So we're saying that there's a material condition that produces ideas, and how these ideas feed back into the cycle of changing material conditions, of changing reality. That's my question is there. Like when do exactly and how does exactly ideas and understanding that ideas are caused either completely or by mistake or by misinterpretation or by some sort of openness that is potential, how do they feed back into the cycle that change the world?
Yeah, because ideas come built in with the possibility that you are wrong, that you are mistaken, that you are not grasping it properly. Because we know that ideas are exactly what allow us to grasp the material basis.
Yeah.
But then ideas come baked in with you have to be fallible in your approach. Because if you take ideas as simply causing reality or causing the material base, then you're approaching something like fascism or totalitarianism in your thinking, and then that's not, that is not conducive to moving forward into kind of some kind of revolutionary consciousness, revolutionary subjectivity. That's fascism.
Yeah, and on that point, I never someone to say you can't believe that because it's wrong. I don't even think honestly that you can say that and know that you're correct in saying that somebody else is wrong. But on your point, this is going to be the most postmodern thing I say today.
One of top 10.
It's not always effective in terms of like cause and effect, especially in a social situation, to be correct. And I'll use Nietzsche here because Nietzsche talks about the use of truth and how our use of truth is so violent that it makes us wither. So he talks about if you pull away the horizon, if you pull away someone's capacity to believe in something, including yourself, if you say, I shall not go any further than this, and I refuse to believe because I refuse to be wrong, you suck out the air of the atmosphere, is what he says. And you become this withered little plant. Because for us, whether it's stupid, whether it's right or wrong, meaning is a dimension of space for us
almost
that
necessary.
We need to have the opportunity to have ideology.
To give meaning.
To give meaning to ourselves, to give meaning
to our experience.
To history, the thesis on history. We need it to matter, even if we're wrong about it. And I think it might be more important that it matters than that it's correct.
Yeah, it's almost like saying like the story is important even if the story was not true. In the sense that, but I don't know. Maybe Eric, I would love if you can do this. Do you mind explaining the automata example from Walter Benjamin and theology being hidden under the table?
That's a tall order. Let's see. The story told of an automaton constructed in such a way that it could play a winning game of chess. Okay, I got to refresh my memory of this. A puppet in Turkish attire sat before a chessboard.
Why does he have to be in Turkish attire?
Yeah, you will see.
Oh, okay.
So there's a little hunchback. He's an expert chess player, and he's hidden under the table. And through a system of mirrors, he's able to play the game. And it looks like the game is playing itself. It looks like there's an automaton sitting in front of it. Is that the basic thing? The puppet is historical materialism.
Correct.
And it must enlist the service of theology in order to, in a sense, justify its moves. And so Benjamin sets up this again, I'll say it, it's a dialectic in a certain sense, right, between theology and historical materialism. But there's another player in this game, it's historicism. Yeah. And this goes back to the sort of contextual argument, right? There's historicism is coming out of social democracy, and the social democrats are somebody that Marx was a little bit upset with in the Goethe program because they were capitulating to the bourgeois in their ideas. They had these false ideas about labor. But I don't know how far I can go with this because it's, I came to Benjamin through the task of the translator and writing on his earlier stuff. And then you get the cultural materialism. You get the cultural materialism of say, Raymond Williams and the British New Left, who pick up Benjamin and they pick up Antonio Gramsci in order to talk about why the revolution fails, because they're not paying attention to the cultural, they're not paying attention to that ideological superstructure because they are reductive. They're not that, and that was a distinction I wanted to bring up. Like, being a determinist doesn't mean you're a reductionist.
Correct.
It doesn't mean you're reducing everything to an economic basis, a materialistic basis. It simply means that, well, if you take a complexity view, you can be a non-reductive determinist. And maybe you can, maybe someone else should carry it on from there, because that puppet is historical materialism.
And the dwarf is theology.
And the dwarf is theology. And the dwarf, in a sense, is the ideological superstructure that retroactively justifies the moves and gives meaning.
But then again, what I think is cool about this image that is being painted by Benjamin is that theology acts through dialectical materialism on the world, on the chest. And also there's a teleological reading of this story. Like this notion that history has a purpose. History has an endpoint, has a mission to be fulfilled. And it's interesting, in a practical sense, I think theology can be instrumentalized to fulfill the purpose of dialectical materialism, as in this story from Benjamin. But also, as Marx warned us, theology can be instrumentalized to stop the motion of dialectical materialism, as in the opium of the people. So I think these are the two complex readings that we have to give, that sometimes religion helps people find class consciousness or understand their position in the world as though the ones being alienated from their own selves and from work and whatnot. But also theology can help with a messianic point of view as being this complex system, closed causal loop of determination, that yes, there's a course of history that is resolving antagonisms that are presented in given moment in time that will eventually solve themselves and produce the future, produce the new.
So you want to maintain kind of the first thing you said there and then get rid of the second thing? Is that?
To be honest, I don't completely know. I think, to be honest with you, I'm more leaning towards the second one, in the sense that I think we use theology to help us understand the point in history in which we get in contact with the process of dialectical materialism. But in the end, when we look back at them, we're going to secularize them all. And I'm scared that even some ontological or metaphysical questions that we use today to cover over the work of dialectical materialism is going to be eventually looked back upon with a category such as religion.
Oh, you fear that?
Oh, yeah. I think we're going to look back at this moment in time and say, oh my God, they were so full of themselves and so ideological, but they were acting as if they were outside of ideology.
Well, this is the battle. There's almost a master-slave dynamic going on, right? Puppet implies a kind of slavery, right? And so the theology uses materialism, but materialism can also use theology.
True.
And the theses kind of enacts that shifting motion, right? If historical materialism can get on top and use theology to its own ends, as opposed to theology being on top and using itself to justify the material conditions. Like Benjamin thought Carl Jung was quite fascist in his thinking. And I think that goes towards one of the readings of Freud, is that it's used to normalize people who have, neuroses, psychoses. It's a way of reining back those neuroses and then normalizing them and setting them back into capitalism and say, okay, now you can be a productive member of society because you've gotten on top of your neuroses, as opposed to, accepting the fact that neurosis is a fundamental part of subjectivity.
Eric, that was fucking beautiful, man. That was beautifully put, and I'm glad Pils is back.
Shit, I missed it.
No, this is perfect. I don't know if you mind repeating a little bit, Eric, so Pils can contextualize, because I'm going to go into delusion Marxism now.
Yeah, I was comparing historical materialism using theology as opposed to theology using historical materialism. Benjamin's text, The Theses on History, enacts that struggle. It's a master-slave dialectic. When theology is on top, you have this situation that I just compared to a certain reading of Freud, where Freud is a normalizer, right? You take someone with a neurosis, you try to give them the tools to handle that neurosis, and then insert them back into society to become a productive member, good capitalist, as opposed to the other way around, which you could say neuroses is a fundamental constituent of our subjectivity. And you should accept that, being different is what gives you your unique perspective in a more self-help soundbite kind of way, right?
Yeah, and my segue to go into Deleuze from here, Pils, and I would love to hear your take from this, because it's a pity that we never got Deleuze on Marx. I think he's one of my biggest bone killers in the history of intellectual work. But I think there's a relationship here in the critique Deleuze does to psychoanalysis, in the sense that these founding myths that in a way Freud went all the way back as much as he could to find these structures as a reflection of psyche that is only materialized in the repetition of these myths, right? So Oedipus is nothing more than a manifestation of something that we have within our structure of psyche that is tangibilized, or in this relationship that we have with family, with others, with libido, with sex, with pleasure, with jouissance, with permission and whatnot, okay? So what Deleuze says is that the schizophrenics, when they are hallucinating, they hallucinate on everything. They don't hallucinate based on myths. Like, the hallucination is completely rhizomatic. Hallucination is rhizomatic in the sense that it doesn't have a beginning point. It doesn't have a reference. Like, hallucination proves that our true free relation with the world is rhizomatic, in the sense that we can dream about being a plant and having a Jewish stomach, and like being stolen during the night, and going everywhere with this notion of schizo. But I think it's also a criticism that Marx was being instrumentalized, as any theology can be instrumentalized, to sort of create a tangible human nature. And human nature, it's a fundamental antagonism with dialectical materialism, because human nature it pre-exists human. It's made manifest in the work that we do with nature. We don't have essence. We have existence. We exist first, and then essence is produced. And psychoanalysis tends to be essential in the sense that it finds in old narratives these structures that naturalize our behavior in the world. And this is anti-dialectical materialism. So that's why I think there's some super strong insight into a Deleuzian reading from schizoanalysis, trying to think that every theological structure tends to create a naturalistic behavior, a natural human nature, and this is completely anti-Marxist. Does it make sense, or am I crazy here?
No. I want to respond to this, but keeping the listener in mind, because you're quite advanced on this point. Sorry. If we're reading metaphysics, so I'm
just a sophist. Like, forgive me. I didn't study philosophy. I just read a lot. That's it. I've never done a lesson in my life.
I would like to kind of pick up 3/4 of where you were there in terms of the relationship between capitalism and religion, because you're kind of saying that history creates not human nature in general, but human nature's dependent on, what the material conditions are demanding at the time.
Exactly.
And we're talking about like secularizing away from religion, and then maybe in the future we'll look back at the period of secularization differently. We don't know, whatever. Yeah. Accidents happen. But really the understanding of the liberal humanist, specifically Protestant Christian, I'm coming to see in my current work largely as a product of capital, because in Europe, the Catholic Church, the monolithic Catholic Church, is the thing that is like preventing free exchange in the 15th, 16th century. Because there's just like, for example, you're not allowed to lend money at interest, right? So it's
usury,
right? There's all these rules that stop, and like the whole social safety net is dependent on the church, and you have to give a certain amount of your money here. So what Luther and Zwingli and these reformers, Calvin, do is they make religion just this closeted, tiny little personal experience,
personal relationship with God.
You don't need the social structure. You don't need the social aspects of religion. We need to break that down. And if what you're saying here is right, Diego, they're not really believing this. They're doing this as unconscious agents of a cybernetic deity called capitalism, despite whatever reasons they give.
Yep.
And they're going to give reasons back and say, oh, you know what? The Catholic Church is corrupt. We need to return to
power and influence.
We need to return to the original meaning of.
How about those
Christ?
Indulgences? Those are pretty exploitative.
I was into a tweet battle yesterday, I think, and I was having a discussion with a guy about the definition of neoliberalism. And the one that currently works for me, the definition of neoliberalism is the instrumentalization of the state to further the profit motive. So is using the state to advance the profit motive. This is neoliberalism for me. But then the guy he's an Orthodox Marxist. He said, well, this is not new. The state has always been in work for the profit motive. I mean, the state is the one that gives property ownership. Without the state, there's no property. The only thing that I can attribute to, in a positive sense of view, the notion of property is the state. So the state has always been an agent of capital. And it's kind of true. And I mean, you've kind of painted in your video about capitalism starting in 1551, if I'm not wrong, right? With these first explorations, right? So yes, we have always been neoliberal, if that's the definition of neoliberalism. But I gave a dialectical reading that is that, okay, if liberalism was the movement and the division from the divine right of kings from the state, but if you read it dialectically, the theological aspect was not superated as an empty negative, but it was integrated in service of what was produced after the Ausschreibung, in the sense that the new state that was created after liberalism is a state that includes theology as an agent to further the profit motive. But then neoliberalism is the superation of the state to give more freedom to the market. So then the state is sublated and it becomes an agent to further improve the motives of capital. But the motive of capital was always the one that was moving history. This is my reading of liberalism as, yes, church is getting too powerful. Is this getting in the way of commerce? So we're going to sublate it and we're going to dialectically go over it and make theology work for capital. And then the second movement on neoliberalism is that the state is getting in front of capital. So we need to sublate the state and get it to work for capitalism. This is my reading of liberalism and then neoliberalism.
And then in the 70s and 80s, you get deregulation and Reagan, Thatcher, and all that sort of laissez-faire liberalism going turned up to 110%. Yeah, I get that. Pills, what do you think?
Well, I'm on this. I'm so obsessed right now with the idea of limits and limits in capital, because I think the only thing that it observes as a cybernetic system, which is not conscious. I mean, it might be conscious by extension through like individual capitalists, but not in the first case. But the program that it seeks is where's the block, where's the limit,
overcome,
and it's pure rhizomatic.
Yeah,
it finds it,
yeah.
And from these like temporary centers of wealth accumulation, which Britain, Holland at the beginning, United States now, it just spreads out and finds these things, and it seems like looking back, like this happens automatically. It's this tentacle growth, and there's no restraint of morality. Morality is an inconvenience, obviously.
Doesn't matter. Yeah.
But then, so my question, I guess, to turn all this back is, if that's the thing that you're fighting, what do you do with meaning to I guess humanize that? And this is why I think humanism is a strategic response, not something I actually believe in, but something I think we almost need to believe in, because it's the only way to introduce a value system that is foreign to this logic that only seeks out blockages. Right.
This is interesting, because my current reading is that, and this is a recent shift in my point of view. I think I went from being an anti-capitalist, which I think is a very infantile position, looking back at myself, to being a post-capitalist. And I think, and this is more rigorous to the materialist tradition, in the sense that capitalism is not something to be antagonized. Capitalism is something that will...
No, it loves antagonism.
Yeah, exactly.
It wants that.
Yeah, it's almost like this sense that what impedes the way becomes the way. Whatever resistance you put in front becomes the way of expansion. It's incredible. It's like this is system theory. Like exactly where you set the limit is where it's going to exhaust the greater amounts of force to overcome it.
Yeah,
it's almost counterintuitive to our notion of resistance. Is insane. Like this systematic reading of capitalism is truly brutal, because it shows us our impotence in a way. But what I'm saying of being post-capitalist, and I think this is something that Engels mentioned when he was confronted with this notion that some primitive cultures were communists. And of course, they cannot be communists, because communism can only come after socialism and after capitalism. So there's no way for a primitive organization of power or social organization to be communist. Doesn't make any sense. Communism necessarily needs the unjust, immoral, the predatory development of capitalism. I think
all that is solid melts into air. All that is sacred is profaned.
But isn't that sentence used in the sense of a complement to capitalism?
Yeah, because it dissolves the feudal order. It dissolves the authoritarian order.
Yeah,
and replaces it.
It's a complement to bourgeois revolutionary spirit, in the sense that dialectics can only be taken serious if you say the current state of things that we're living in is a resolution from past antagonisms. And also, I always love to remind me this sentence from Hegel that was recuperated by Marx and Engels, that everything that is real is rational and what is rational is real. But then Engels added, what is real is rational and what is rational can be real. In the sense that it doesn't closes the loop, but it opens a possibility for rationality, if rationality is truly rational, to eventually become actualized in history. So in that sense, my reading is that, yes, we live in, and not, it's hard to make these claims without moralizing, but we live in the only possible time, right? Like this is almost deterministic to say that if there's some organizations of state power, accumulation and production, is because they're rational up to a certain sense. You either accept that or you marry yourself to this notion that we're truly free and that everything is spontaneous and it was created out of voluntarism and free will. No, it has to have a certain level of rationality for it to operate. What we have to understand and almost take a vow of humility is to say that things will change when they're rational enough to change. So if we're not ready to overcome capitalism, is because capitalism hasn't produced everything that is able to produce in the sense of rationality and in the sense of the logic of the material world acting upon itself in a causal complex sense.
Do I hear some accelerationist tones in there?
Yeah, step on it, baby.
Well, no, it's not. If what we're saying is, capitalism is the most revolutionary mode of production so far. There's no, we're going to have to out-revolutionize this extraordinarily revolutionary regime. And what I said earlier about, we need to make room for meaning and spiritualism. And I'm trying to be nice to the theological crowd saying that, but how, we do really have to think hard about how, marrying Marxism to theology is going to create some kind of context to, out-revolutionize capitalism, because it loves opposition, right? The limits you set for it become the guiding principles for the next step. It doesn't take any kind of limits or blockages. It takes those, it co-opts them, and it moves forward, and it moves up to the next stage. And accelerationism is just about speeding up that process. My only worry is really about, things like climate change and stuff, right? You talk about materialistic basis, is accelerationism going to lead to the failure of the material basis for civilization in the first place? Then where does revolution go, right? We've got heat waves in China. We got Pakistan underwater. We got 2 massive hurricanes hitting North America.
Earthquakes.
Yeah.
You see the Swiss glaciers just fucking getting dissolved?
Yeah. Jesus, and that's where the flooding comes from too.
But that's kind of what it sounds like, Diego, you might be saying is this, it will only change when it's rational for it to change.
Yep.
I hate the infantile position of accelerationism insofar as it says, well, we shouldn't do anything then.
Fuck it. Yeah, fuck it.
If it's fuck it accelerationism, then just go away. You're not.
Accelerationists are thinking about Bitcoin and shit like that more than they're thinking about.
No. I think those are like dumb libertarians. They don't even know they're just being milked out of their money like fucking idiots. It's insane. It's the biggest pyramid scheme in the story of the universe. It's ridiculous. If all of capitalism is a huge pyramid scheme, like NFTs and crypto is like the pyramid scheme of our generation. But moving beyond that, I think like this, even if it's a naive position to assume accelerationism, but it pre-implies a notion of freedom. It pre-implies your consciousness as an active agent of change, which is already for me a lie.
I know that's lib shit. It's like your decisions matter because you're you and you're special.
Yeah, it's like people saying like, oh my God, if you're at the moment that I'm presenting my documentary about the World Cup, right? So everybody's saying like, but if you're really against Qatar and the 6,500 people died, you should boycott the World Cup. It's like, I don't believe in the market. What do you mean boycott? That's fucking dumb. It's like to think that my decisions actually influence the market is to be liberal. Like that's the worst insult ever. Of course, I don't believe in the market. It won't alter itself because of my decision. That's retarded. It's like that's probably the lowest you can get. And in that sense, I think even being a Marxist, it's kind of hard that you have to find your own point of view about how much you can influence the system back, versus how much you're a product of the system itself. And this is
I think that's totally true. And if you're honest, you're always more a product than you are a producer. Unless you're rich.
Exactly my point. Exactly my point, Pils. So people come back to this notion of are you revolutionary or reformist? It's like, what do you mean reformist or revolutionary? Like, you have to determine for me first if you're a product of the system or if you're an agent in the system. Because and this is my issue. My latest arguments are always with Marxists that are in their root idealists. And this I cannot stand.
And moralists.
Yeah, and moralists. And that is just...
This is my massive shift of the last 6 months has been like, capitalists are not bad. Yeah. They're not good. They're not bad. You're not good because you're not a capitalist. You would be if you could be. You would be if you just had accumulated generational wealth. You would be exactly the same unconscious animal that they are.
Exactly.
Yeah. Marx talks about this sort of thing, the exigencies of competition, right? If you start bringing morals into the way you run your business, you're going to fail and you're going to descend into poverty. There's certain exigencies that you just have to follow. It's neither good nor bad. It's just what is. There's no good nor bad. Thinking makes it so.
Yeah. Are we going to look back at morals in times and say that moral was the religion of our generation?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm back on genealogy of morals, which we opened up this episode with, and you need a plant needs an atmosphere to grow. You can't grow in a desert. So then I think, what are we supposed to make myths? That's what I would like to be the goal, to make better myths.
Their stories. And maybe this is where Deleuze wanted to take us, in the sense of how do we create the new? How do we truly produce the new? And this is for me a big question. How are we able to not change in the moralistic sense? And I think this is almost where we ended our last conversation as well, Pils, without Eric. That I'm not worried in this moral point of view and understanding that my son is condemned to homelessness and living in the street by the capitalist logic. And even saying that, I understand that capitalism is not a moral system. Is not a moral failure to be born unable to produce. It's a matter of efficiency. It's a matter of productivity. It's a logic that works within capital for the accumulation of capital for the sake of itself, that doesn't account for human capital. And this is why I'm always punching on this button of raising consciousness that we're no longer humans. Under capital, we're human capital. Like the subcategory capital is more important than the subcategory human under the logic of the system itself. And even understanding that my direct family, my son, is extremely fragile within the system, I understand that the system is not to blame in the sense that is not a moral failing that I'm judging and saying that we should be better, we should aim to prosper and to include others. It's like, dude, what do you propose? Like, what system is more efficient at the moment? Which is the most productive system in the history of mankind? To be a Marxist is also to understand that there's nothing more productive than capitalism. What we have to understand is, like Eric said, there's limits to capitalism. And how do we deal with these limits? How the limits propose an alternative, how the limits produce further capitalism, and how can we use the creation of the new as potential alternatives, as desirable paths for the future and stuff.
Yeah, that is what makes me a little annoyed about the moralistic or idealist materialist position, is that, you can't bring morals into the picture. When we say things like, Trump is an aberration. No, Trump is democracy, an appendage of capitalism working just as it should. It's produced its result that it is made to produce. It's not an aberration. It's not an anomaly. It's working just fine, and that's how it's going. It kind of annoys me when it's like, oh, well, we just have to be more moralistic and teach voters, to vote with their hearts rather than just with their heads.
Yeah, vote harder.
Vote harder. Vote with your heart, not just your head. Right. Like, I mean, saying here, it's not a fight for the future. It's a fight for the past. Right. It's a revolutionary struggle as a fight for the past. To articulate, he says in the thesis 6 here, to articulate the past historically doesn't mean to recognize it the way it is. It means to seize hold of a memory as it flashes up in a moment of danger. And there's a certain element of messianism is about the past. And then through that, we move into the future, not about the fight for the future, simple as if, events are this sort of linear progression, beads on a string.
Do you mind if I want to reconnect Spinoza's ideas of freedom with Benjamin's reading of history, in the sense that, so Spinoza readings of freedom are, we're only free as we are ignorant of the causes that produces us. And Benjamin says we will never be able to produce the future unless we fully reconcile the past. Like it's almost, there's something there, no? Am I crazy? There's a synchronicity.
I think the connection there is on something that we haven't brought up yet, which is labor. Because Marx is a labor realist. And I think because of the way we have all grown up, we do not believe in the reality of labor. We believe in commodities. We believe that commodities are things that can be sold like regardless of labor. And I was thinking about this earlier this week, actually. The only place where we really consider labor to be something real is in intellectual production. Like if you write a book or make a YouTube video like you do, no one thinks that belongs to somebody else when they come into possession of it. But if you buy headphones or microphone or shoes, you think that thing belongs to you now, not that it belongs to the labor that's invested into it. And you were saying earlier, of course, capitalism doesn't give a fuck about you, but it does care about your energy.
Yeah.
It cares about the energy that it can extract from you. And the ideology, I think all of us believe, we're even knowing that it's incorrect, but we still believe it, is you produce something and now now it's no longer yours. So there's this division of energy that you've expended, really, materially, truly. Energy has been moved from you into a commodity, into a product. And we disconnect those two things and say, now the product is like self-caused, as you're talking about in the Spinozan sense. It's on its own. It's not connected to all those, that network that generated it in the first place, and not just whoever sewed the shoe together, but the global network that transported it from Vietnam to here or whatever. But we forget that labor is real, and I think that might be a first stage to demystify the ideology that even I absolutely believe without remembering that I believe it.
Yeah, is the things that you don't know, you know. So it's interesting that you brought labor into this, and because like this notion that the dialectical part of dialectical materialism is antagonisms resolving themselves, and there's one definition of truth from Hegel that is in one of his texts in Phenomenology that I really like, is that freedom is the attitude to overcome that which impedes freedom. So freedom is the attitude to overcome whatever limits freedom. But also, capitalism is the attitude of overcoming that which limits capitalism. So there's also a dialectical reading of capitalism as this ever-growing machine that grows where limits are imposing to it. It's almost like capitalism is the Geist manifesting itself and dialectically overcoming wherever we try to stop it. There's a fucked up Hegelian reading of capitalism as a god that I would love to explore into at some moment. But what I wanted to get into this is that this notion that being a messianic orthodoxist materialistic dialectical materialist from a Marxist point of view, story is fixing itself out, is figuring itself out as antagonism clash, and new solutions are going to evolve out of these antagonisms that are going to revolve. So labor, right? So you said when we produce content, maybe the people that are seeing the product of our work, of our energy, doesn't see our commodity as being alienated, because they cannot separate the production of our labor from the merchandise. So already a part of the alienation was solved. Maybe we still feel alienated because we know YouTube is keeping 30% of what you make. So you feel kind of robbed and you don't fully recognize yourself in the result of your work. But a part of the four types of alienation presented by Marx, one of them maybe was resolved within the production of capital. Like within capital, we gave birth to these content platforms that monetize our time directly. But by monetizing our time directly, they overcome one of the alienation's antagonisms. That was the alienation between we don't see the labor force in the merchandise that we consume. You see, and maybe, and I'm not dreaming, not being messianic, but maybe this is the dwarf under the table. The dwarf under the table is how new technologies will eventually, even if by mistake, the resolution of said antagonisms that then will be signified as a new moment in history.
I mean, I don't think it's arguable that I feel less alienated editing my videos than putting cedar roofs on rich people's houses.
Yeah. But that's the type of alienation where you don't own the product of your labor. You don't see yourself in it. It appears in the marketplace as something foreign to you and your labor, which originally produced it. Now, this collapse of time and space actually closes that distance a little bit. It doesn't help the alienation. It's still not you. It's still not yours, but it's much closer. We can see what it's doing. We can see what's happening. And I gladly give my time and my energy to these things because that's what we need to do. I guess I just like to be closer to it, and that's my idea that doesn't matter. These are my ideas that don't matter, but at least I get to see them, and I get to see the metrics, and I get to see the reactions.
But then you see, Eric, my point was that and correct me if I'm wrong, the four types of alienation is alienated to nature, alienated to yourself, alienated to others, and alienated to work. Or what's the fourth one?
The product of labor.
Yeah,
the product of labor. Okay. So you see, so we're still alienated from nature, very much. We're still alienated from the product of our work, because even us as creators, you see yourself, but you don't fully recognize yourself in the result of your labor. Like this part of alienation, I still feel kind of there. But alienation from others, this is where I find interesting about what you said, Pils, is that even if I don't fully recognize myself in the result of my work, because as Eric said, there's some degree of alienation that is not resolved, people don't alienate the fruit of my work from myself anymore.
Right.
That if we break it down in 4 parts, that part of alienation at least is changed, is different.
It's lessened at the very least.
Yeah, and as Lenin said, like the process of dialectical materialism of becoming post-capitalist, it could be centuries.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you can survive it, but
yeah. No, if we think, if 1844 Marx was about disalienation, whereas Das Kapital Marx is not an accelerationist, but closer to that position where capitalism's internal contradictions have to play out.
Yeah.
And so that's where I don't know if I want to go straight accelerationism. Okay, yeah, accelerate these internal contradictions, right? What happens if time and space collapses and we at least we don't recognize ourselves in the product, doesn't resolve that, but there is still a certain immediacy to it. Is that the process? That's the process that is happening. And then you have sort of, I guess the bigger picture comes from like Yanis Varoufakis talking about like platform techno-feudalism.
Yeah.
That's the next phase. We're speeding towards that, and we're in a new kind of feudalistic next phase. And so
I want to talk about this for a second, because I don't know if it's right to say that it's feudalism, which makes it sound like we're going back. But really, I think what's happening when we say like the rent economy is capitalism is running into a final limit, which is the liberal humanist individual. And so far, we've been thinking, oh no, liberal humanism and capitalism, they work great together. But capitalism reached its new limit. It's found you as an individual. It's saying, now I'm going to mine your eyeballs. I'm going to creep down your brainstem, commodify your attention. I don't give a fuck.
You to work harder.
I don't give a fuck if there's an individual here or not. You're now just a rent machine. Oh, yeah. I think we're running to that contradiction. And then like the question is, what's next? Of course, we're running into a limit, I think.
So what will be cool here is looking at literature and entertainment, the way we dream about the future, about these notions of cyberpunk and post-apocalyptic worlds and whatnot. I think we haven't been able to fully embrace the nightmare of post-human capitalism. Like the true nightmare of post-human capitalism. Like we see it in cracks.
Yeah, and we still think we're going to survive it. That's ideology at its purest.
Yeah, exactly. That's liberalism. That's liberalism to blame, because this liberalism still thinks capitalism is working out of human freedom. That's the problem. They don't see capitalism as a system, as a self-sufficient system and an independent system with its own logic and its own set of goals. They see capitalism as a manifestation of human action. This is the fundamental problem. They believe in axioms, for God's sakes. It's beyond dumb. It's beyond dumb. It's like it's dangerously dumb. And privacy, and in the sense of personal ownership. You do not own your own attention anymore. Consider that. What is you if you don't own your attention? They have created this notion that there's a drug that can make you feel like a second was, I think, 100 years. Right. So the first thing we can think of, we're going to use that to punish prisoners and to shorten your sentences and still condemn you to labor and to make you like experience reality in a completely...
Wait, is this fictional?
No, this is not fictional.
Holy shit.
Yeah. This is why I think people haven't taken seriously enough the nightmare of post-human capitalism. Like people will have no idea what it's like to be drugged out of your bed to produce until the point that you're needed, and then you're no longer needed and you're worth less than cow dough. Is this we cannot even fathom the notion of amoral systems because we are so anthropocentric.
Yes.
It's like a dream or the moment of death. There's like a 1,000 years could be just packed into that.
Oh, yeah.
But a drug to induce that.
Yeah. No, it's insane.
That's something else.
Yeah. This is for me the limit. The limit is and again, this is where you fall in this ambiguous line. Am I a religious communist? Religious in the sense that I think communism is a worldview that explains everything and is going to figure itself out even if I don't act. And like, am I that type of religious communist? I take communism as a religion that is over-determining itself to overcome capitalism eventually? Or like, do I have to take it seriously enough to also embrace the fact that humans are not necessarily part of the equation?
It's a nice thought.
Yeah.
I'm not ready to go there.
Yeah. Fuck that, man. Yeah. I hope I'm dead way before those things come out. Like, really.
Because I am, philosophically speaking, I am a post-humanist, but I don't even want to imagine that because it's too terrifying.
Yeah, it is. I think,
which is, only a God can save us. I think Heidegger.
Have you seen
response to that?
Have you seen this new anime from Netflix, Cyberpunk 2077?
No,
it's not a video game.
Yeah, it's based on a video game. I didn't play the game, but I watched the anime because it's from one of my favorite studios from Japan, Trigger Studios. Their art style is out of this fucking world. I swear to God, it's the best that I've seen in TV for a very, very long time. Even just because of the art style, it's worth watching. But it touches on some trans and post-humanist topics that are quite interesting. Like, this paradox of the ship of Theseus?
Theseus,
like this notion, Theseus. So we have changed the piece. We have repaired the ship so many times, and we have changed the pieces so many times that how can we tell if the same ship, right? If the same ship. So right. I think this notion comes back to what we understand, and a key part of the myopic point of view of liberalism, as they don't fully embrace the notion that even humans are. How can I say this? Ethereal in a very.
They believe in the. How do I put this? Sorry, I was like all coming in here hot. Like I knew what I was going to say.
No, but I'm missing the word as well.
They believe in the morality of capitalism. Really, at bottom, they're like, okay, it's going to go this far, but no further. Whereas I think if you really understand what an amoral system is, you're going to dissolve. You are going to become the limit that the church used to be. And it will dissolve you, break you into parts, and you'll be like just an extraneous little bump spore sitting around, waiting for and it'll use you to do something. It'll need you for something, discard you.
Yeah,
whatever.
I almost could listen to this liberal snowflake in my mind saying my boss is not bad. Is not that bad. It's like the boot that steps on me is not that heavy. Bro, it's super heavy. You have no idea. It's going to stump you so hard. You have no clue. But it's almost like, do they enjoy it in the Joa Sans type of way?
I think you'd call that pure ideology.
Yeah.
It's enjoying your symptom.
Yeah, enjoy your symptom. They fall in love with their symptom.
In a sense, it is true, though. Like the suffering is profound, but not profound enough for us to think this is the only thing that matters. Like when peasants are starving, they don't care about their life enough to keep it, right? And like, I don't know,
the tipping points of revolution.
18th century France, right?
Yeah, tipping
like
points.
If you're starving, it doesn't matter if you die. Yeah. So until we're starving, we'll just let the rent out our head. And eventually that contradiction will reach its culmination.
And it always brings us to the question, will it be soon enough? Like for example, where do you do manifestations today? Doing manifestations on the streets is fucking worthless. Nothing happens on the streets. Like soon there will be no buildings to manifest in front of. Like, what do you do? Cancel politicians in Twitter? It's like, that's your last line of resistance. It's so pathetic. It's like, oh my God. I don't know. Like, it gives me the creeps to think that when we reaches the point where dialectically capitalism as this Geist that is overcoming whatever limits it is needing to overcome us as the final barrier to be overcome, we won't have any tools of resistance. in the very delusion sense.
Yeah. I think another angle I was just thinking of through all that too is that our heads are spaces for rent for ideas, in the sense that, like Guattari and the production of subjectivity, right? We've been talking a lot like the base and the superstructure are two separate things. And really, when you think about the production of subjectivity, ideas are just squatting in our heads in a certain way. We're giving free rent space to ideas and subjectivities. That nice book Maurizio Lazzarato writes about Guattari, and that seems relevant to me. If subjectivity is produced, whereas on the other hand, liberalism is kind of egoistic. We are rational, self-possessed individuals who are almost present at our own birth in a certain way. No, that's not the case. We're almost born. I wouldn't say tabula rasa, but we are subjects that are produced for capital to then exploit in the future. We are shaped, and we have to break out of that in a certain sense. Or maybe Deleuze and Guattari wouldn't be prescriptive like that, but that's
not tabula rasa. But I think it's like inarguable to say we're already born in motion. We're born in a trajectory. You're not born sitting still before some causes come and affect you. You're born in motion.
Yeah, like the process relational kind of view, as opposed to just the egotistical view where it's like, I am my own person.
And if you're born on an accumulated gravity well of wealth, then your life will be very different than if you're not born with that. And that's really not that much up to you in the end.
One of my dream projects is to research the use of corn in Latin America as a big eugenetic project to dumb people down.
Corn's the next after your football documentary?
Maybe. I would love to research the effect of overconsumption of corn in Latin America to make people stupid.
Wait, what? This is an epigenetic effect?
Yeah.
Corn makes you dumber?
Oh, yeah. The corn is barely non-eatable for humans.
Oh, wow. We're back to cornflakes again then.
Of course we're back to fucking cornflakes. Yes.
And we're at biosemiotics. So Eric, if you know.
Yeah, but absolutely, Eric, in the sense that, like, for example, because of my son, my wife, and she's fucking brilliant. I would love for you guys to talk to her sometime, even if she doesn't give interview because of her practice. She has no public figure at all. She takes psychoanalysis very, very seriously. But she went into epigenetics because of my son's disease. Like, we started looking at his behavior from psychoanalysis, and it was a dead end. He has no language. What do you do? So we went into epigenetics and biomedicine and predictive medicine. So we changed his diet. We went with nutritionists, with endocrinologists, with epigeneticians, and we changed supplements and what he eats and whatnot. He started speaking.
That's amazing. Wow. And that's the amazing thing about epigenetics and the way that, neo-Darwinism has kind of colonized our view of biology, right? And it takes out, what's his name? Not Darwin, but the other guy, Lamarck, right? Lamarck had the ideas that within your lifetime, certain things could be produced that would be then passed down, rather than, Richard Dawkins, the selfish gene kind of theory, where epigenetics is not an option in that point of view. I guess there's a certain amount of scientific literacy that's going to be needed to develop among people too, in order to sort out which ideas are really new. Epigenetics is something that's fascinating and interesting. Whereas, the neo-Darwinists and the followers of Richard Dawkins need to just go stop.
Stop talking. Just to clarify. So when I say he started speaking, still his vocabulary is super, super limited, but we saw progresses in his cognitive abilities. So this is my point. Okay, let's say we're not free to ideologically change the world, but out of the efficiency of capital, of feeding mass workers with whatever was the cheapest available option, we produce subjectivity that are a physical consequence of the consumption of corn.
I don't want to touch that.
Why not?
Because I don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
That sounds compelling, But
that's why I'm saying it's one of my dream projects to research that. To say to what point, because we know it's true that your food alters your psyche, your mood, your predisposition to the world. I mean, come on, we're researching now the effects of early Alzheimer in people with diabetes, and is related to sugar. Of course, what we put into our body changes our not our psyche. It's more like our ability to produce a subjectivity. So in that sense, I would love to go into detail and to see how, even if it was not out of pure intention, we created a whole series of subjectivities that are consequence of material conditions out of mistakes of our interpretation of freedom. But it was truly the intention of capital acting through us in maximizing profitability, work, and feeding people with something that is cheap.
I really like this idea, not knowing any of the details, but I really like the idea of pointing out these sites that are in plain sight. Like corn is one of the most, and not just people eating corn, but like livestock and animals. Most of what they eat is corn. It's not the best thing for them to eat. It's much better for them to be eating grass. Yeah. So all of this comes to a head at this little site. And I really like these investigative projects. You did one with football, and we'll look forward to that next one. And you should just keep coming back every month, Diego.
Yeah.
Man, I love it. These are the best conversations ever.
I would love to go on about it, right? Because corn is a system effect. Someone I haven't brought up before, but Jason Moore, right? The cheaps of capitalism, right? And it's a system effect. We moved to industrialism. They prefer cheap nature. What do we get in all of our industrial kitchens now? We get salt, we get sugar, we get those cheap, flavorful things.
Enhancers.
And isn't corn has the same GI
as sugar? It has the same Oh yeah,
like intentionally modified.
Yeah,
as a domesticated product. Yeah.
Right now, 99% of the human consumption of corn is from one species that is created from Monsanto. We almost eradicated all corn varieties around the world for one of them that is the most resistant and the easiest to replicate. The decision is purely within the logic of capital. Purely within the logic of capital.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and it's making us all. It's having a deleterious effect, to say the least.
Insulin resistance, is killing because microbiota, like the diversity of bacteria in your gut and in all your body, is dependent on diversity. But because we tend to eat, because of efficiency of capital, specific types of food, it leads to the diminishing effect of having a variety of bacteria. But in the end, this is like the counterintuitive reading of complexity theory. If complexity leads to complexity, the uncomplex system of bacteria in your gut can lead to uncomplex outcome of subjectivity. And of course, this is me being completely ludicrous doing this ideological reading of material conditions. But for sure, there's a chemical argument to be made.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. Definitely, monocropping, genetic simplification, the GMOs in order to be more resistant to certain pesticides, which then brings more monocropping and genetic simplification. Then suddenly everything is just one type of corn.
And even if we become
corn people.
Yeah, we become corn people. And even if you're skeptical about the epigenetic effects of corn on your conscious, what you are doing in effect, from a complexity theory perspective, is limiting the potential for any accidents to happen, which makes reality more predictable, which is what capitalism wants. It wants prediction. It wants the easiest map, the easiest causal relationship. You see this and you react in a predictable way. But anyway, guys, we
need to have this conversation with Matt and Vic. I would love to have the liberals on this. There's so many things I would love to bring up and see their point of view.
For today, like one of our Dungeons and Dragons games, we'll never get off the beginning.
That would be awesome.
We'll just be arguing for 2 hours and then
I used to be a dungeon master when I was younger.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
True geek.
We're getting it going again.
Is there anything else you want to point people towards, Diego, before we wrap up? We're past an hour and a half.
I will point them towards past episodes of the Peel Pod. That's enough for me.
Thank you.
No, come on.
You're too kind.
No, you guys are fucking awesome beyond comprehension. To be honest with you, I just did this event in Mexico City, and I brought my friends from other countries just for the sake and the pleasure of seeing them in person and having 24-hour discussions about super complex topics, which was fucking amazing. And I'm just now releasing the podcast that we recorded because I rented a tower, like a 4-story building, and I put each of them in one apartment, and one apartment I transformed into a studio. So what we did is that every day we recorded, like permutating A and B, A and C, A and D, like, and then all of us together. And then we did one live event with almost 1,000 people in Mexico City to discuss about what does it mean for us to be Latin. And we even brought up the point that Quebec could be part of Latin America.
Ooh, excellent. I think that's something our listeners should check out big time.
Yeah, but it's an interesting argument, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. The Latin language influences, I mean, depends on how you determine what is Latin America, but you could argue.
Good. They are Latin and they are in America.
Yeah, I like it. I think Quebec should separate.
Romantic, and then, at least. I don't know if they're Latin.
For sure. And I would love to have you guys on my channel as well. Even if most of my crowd speaks Spanish, most of them speak English as well. So anytime you guys want to come along as standalone characters, avatars, or as a group of individuals, which I tend to believe that you guys exist in real life. I think I'm right. So there's no proof, but I think I'm right. If you guys want to come, you're super invited as well.
Oh, yeah. That's how we know. We're here in Ontario. It's a big, horrible beast. It sucks up Quebec's goodness, and it feeds off Western Canada. And we're hungry for that nice Athabasca oil fields.
We need to continue the colonial project by taking over Latin American YouTube.
Oh my God! Yeah, that's the project. That's the true project. Now you show your tentacles, pills.
First corn, then Latin American YouTube.
Ontario hungry.
I will. With that, I will end the recording. Thank you to all the listeners for coming. Thanks, Eric and Diego. You just got to keep coming back.
Absolutely.
We'll make it a regular thing. All right. Goodbye, everybody.
All right.